Hello guys, welcome to this lecture. So in the previous lecture, we would have seen how to define a function. Now in this lecture, we're going to see how to pass on the arguments to a function. Now let me take an example, which is addition of numbers. So this is my example that I'm going to use. Now let me jump into my program, which is I'm going to define a function. So the syntax I would have already told you in the previous lecture. Now I'm going to give add 1. Since the example is addition of numbers, I'm going to name my function as add1 and followed by parenthesis and colon. So I would have told you in the previous lecture that these parentheses are for the arguments or parameters, so you can call it either way. The maximum number of parameters that you can pass over here is 2. So you can pass it like this, a or b or x comma y. So it's absolutely the user's choice or wish. So now in this I'm gonna pass only a single parameter, which is a. Now moving on to the statement part, which is I'm gonna print a plus 1. Now the next part is calling the function. So I have to call the function, and instead of calling the argument directly over here, I have to call the value that's specified for the argument. Now the value that I'm going to specify for the argument is 2. So let's check the output, and there you go, we have the answer as 3. So how does this work? So what it does is it just gets in, it just checks for the value that you have specified for the argument. So for the argument I've given the value 2, so it checks for the value. Now it just moves on to the next part, which is the statement part. So it just prints the value over here 2. Now it just returns 2 plus 1, 3 over here. So this is how it works for a single argument in a function. Now there's one more thing, which is I'm going to call this function once more. Now instead of 2, I'm going to pass on some other value. So let me just pass on 15 and let's check whether it executes correctly. So there we go, it executes the correct value. So moving on to my next example, which is I'm going to pass multiple parameters in my next example. So I'm going to define my function, and in this function I'm going to name it as add2, since we're going to use two parameters over here, which are, let me use x and y, and followed by a colon, and in the next line I'm going to print x plus y. Now I have to call the function, which is add2, and now I'm going to pass on 10 comma 20. Now if you just check the output, and there you go, we have 30 as the output. So this also acts in the similar manner. So in this, the values that I've given are given 10 for x and 20 for y. So it just gets in and it just adds up and prints. So this is how you pass on the arguments to a function. So that's it for this lecture. Thank you.